Hello and welcome to Profiles in Risk. This is your host, Tony Cañas. And today I have with me Rachel Olney, which I'm doing my best on the last name.
I always tell people it's like no elbows, all knee.
Olney.
All knee.
Okay. Okay. No elbows, all knee. That's an interesting way to put it. Who is the founder and CEO of Geosite. First of all, thank you for joining me today. We always give the guest a chance to give the elevator pitch, the elevator pitch for their company. So what is Geosite and why is it important for the insurance world?
Yeah, so Geosite is an enterprise SaaS platform, and we build applications that bring spatial data into business operations and analysis workflows. And it's exciting because, as everybody knows, the world of satellites and drones and aircraft and AI to analyze all that data and roof detection, all these things are really exciting, and all of this data is there. And it needs to be put into actual applications to be leveraged in things like claims and underwriting. And so we're really excited to be the tool that people use to leverage all of that information.
Okay, so let me put on my let's start with claims, because that's kind of where I started my career. I was never a field claims guy. I was always in office, but I wrote an article years ago, one of the original insurance nerds technology focused articles back in like 2015 about geo satellites that could get you an image of Earth, any place in Earth once a day. And so, but of course, even with access to those images, we didn't have a way to digest that. Right, other than literally like giving the
clicking
adjuster
through
the photo,
images,
right?
That takes forever.
Exactly. So how does your system help us digest through that data?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I bet you're writing that maybe around like 2016, maybe earlier.
Something like that. Yeah, I think it was a little bit earlier than that. Yeah. It was Planet Labs. I don't even know if they're still in business.
So what was really exciting was Planet still is taking pictures of the whole Earth every day. And they're just starting to launch higher resolution satellites. So my background's in engineering, and we can deep dive on the crazy circuitous path later, but I had spent a lot of time looking at satellites. And so I understood there was all of this incredible data. And then right around 2016, you saw this rise of geospatial analytics companies. So this is where Capable Analytics starts to spring up. You have companies like Orbital Insight, Crowd AI, Descartes, Ursa, like all of these geospatial analytics companies start bubbling up. And it was really exciting because now you didn't have this problem of like, okay, I have a picture of the whole Earth every day. But what the heck do I do with that? I can't look at the whole Earth every day. And so they were starting to solve that problem. So they were going through and saying, hey, we can use machine vision to train algorithms to tell you, hey, this road is flooded, or this roof is damaged, or those sorts of things, start to pull out the important aspects of the spatial data. But at the end of the day, what that was producing was even more spatial data, right? So they'd say, we can give you outlines of roofs, or we can give you maps of where the roads have been washed out, and we can, give you this spatial data. And for really large organizations, they'd be like, okay, cool. Let me pull up this PDF and then look at that, and then look at the policy address, and then maybe pull up Google Maps and try to correlate in my head. And so people were still interacting with the geospatial data manually, if they were using it at all. And a lot of times the analytics would end up being kind of a side project that the organization would run and be like, yes, we saw that this was useful, but we have no way of connecting it to our larger business practices. And so we're just going to leave it off, right? And so they'd switch to just back to the status quo. And so that's when I got really excited, because you have the raw data, which is exciting. You have the analyzed data, which is really exciting. And then there's an opportunity to actually look at people's workflows and work really closely with, okay, what is the claims adjuster doing in their day-to-day work? How do we put this data into their hands at the exact right moment in a way that's actually useful, rather than adding an extra step to their process?
Okay. Okay. In a way
Yeah.
that's actually useful. Okay. And you're not a brand new uh, company. You 4.5 years. So how has it evolved in those so you had the basic idea was this needs to be usable, right? This needs to fit into their workflow.
Yeah.
I'm guessing.
How did we get to here?
Yes.
So Geosite actually started in the world of national security and defense. So my background, my PhD was for the NSA and Cyber Command. And I actually met my CTO in the Pentagon while we were working on some stuff there. And I was seeing those large trends that I was talking about, I was actually seeing from the perspective of special operations. So I was watching these special operations teams trying to leverage this data and struggling because most geospatial tools are meant for scientists and engineers. And I was like, if they're struggling to use this data, I guarantee every other industry is as well. And so we spent the first, right? Like, I mean, if you look at the geospatial market, 75% of it is governments. And it's governments buying it primarily for infrastructure. So things like USGS, or much, much larger part of the pool is just defense. They are really the ones who started, the space industry in the world of geospatial. And so they're still the biggest customer. So that's where we started. We spent our first few years just operating in national security and doing stuff in, special operations and with the Air Force. One of our favorite contracts that we have that's a long-term contract is search and rescue. So all of search and rescue coordination in the US happens on our platform. So you can imagine it's a little bit like claims. You have some sort of incident, you need information about what's going on, and then you need to triage and resolve that incident. So whether it's search and rescue, whether it's special operations, whether it's claims, it's basically you have somebody who has to run through a process, who needs access to spatial data, rather than somebody who wants to analyze geospatial data.
Okay, and they need access to spatial data in a way that they can digest quickly, in a way that can be actionable.
Exactly.
Rather than here's Google Earth worth of data.
Yeah, or even worse, here's a shape file, and then you're sitting there like, I don't know what to do with a shape file. I don't know how to open a GeoTIFF. And so these poor insurance folks who are trying to figure out, like, how do we innovate using this data? They're like Googling how to open a GeoTIFF. And they're like, well, I guess I use this tool called ArcGIS or QGIS. And it's these extremely technical tools. And they're like, this is too much work. I'd rather just send someone out there to look at the damage. And so reducing that barrier to entry where people can just say, okay, there's been a large natural disaster. We want to automatically triage claims where the remote sensing is telling us there's this type of damage, right? Whether that's wind, whether that's flooding, and then being able to actually batch and resolve those claims very quickly by saying, hey, we know within this area, it's total loss. So let's just pay those out. And then within this area, it looks like it's, borderline. And so we're going to look at different things. And then, hey, we're getting a claim over here that says it's a total loss, but actually it's outside of what our remote sensing data is telling us. So also being able to flag things that are outside the norm. Yeah.
Makes perfect sense. I served 10 days of catastrophe duty back in I was an inside adjuster, but they sent me out for 10 days of catastrophe duty in Joplin, Missouri. And the instructions they gave was everything's totaled. Right, all the cars are total. Just find the car, take a picture. But the reason that you reminded me of, there was one that I identified that just did not seem right. Where I show up and it's not quite in the neighborhood where the rest of the damage is,
Yeah.
and it's an RV, and the house is in perfect shape, like there's not a missing branch on the trees, and the RV is beat up, right? I was like, okay, that does
You're
not
like,
appear to be right,
something's a bit off here.
but it really was an extreme case
Yeah.
where a fairly rookie claims adjuster would notice and kind of report it of you know, of the chain.
Yeah.
But we definitely did not have data on right, the neighborhoods that the sensors say got hit,
Exactly.
are where the losses are likely to have happened. And I think at that point they had enough to be able to have a good idea of what zip codes we like there were likely to be a lot of losses in, but zip codes are pretty large.
Yeah. Zip
Right.
codes are very large, and you can have massive, especially if you're thinking about things like flooding or wind, like terrain changes completely what's going to end up happening to some homes versus others. And so there's inherently a geospatial aspect that, you know, is important.
Oh yeah,
I mean, even, yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was gonna say, even with COVID data, we learned that using zip codes wasn't super granular, right? Like as they were building all these models, and zip codes can be, they scale differently depending on where you are. Sometimes they're like weirdly shaped. It's just like, it's not, you know, not super helpful.
Yeah, it was not designed for
Yeah.
that in any way, shape, or form. You mentioned flood, and I think without having discussed it ahead of time with you, I'm guessing that in the flood space, this is huge because flood. I've never worked flood, but Nick Lamparelli, who founded this podcast and ran the first like 100 episodes, is a big flood guy. So I learned a lot from him
Yeah.
about flood, and flood is a game of inches.
Yep.
Literally, like it's not did the it's not did the entire neighborhood get flooded. It's
Yeah. It's what's the actual elevation of the foundation of this home specifically.
exactly of this
This
specific
property.
building.
Yeah.
Exactly, that
Well,
makes
and
a huge difference.
what's fascinating about flood data and where is a thing. So as a geospatial company, of course, we literally have a pedantics Slack channel to hash these things out because they come up. Like where is a building is an answerable question. What is a place is not an answerable question inside of our company because place you can get really pedantic about it. Is an airplane a place? It's moving. Anyways, but when you're looking at things like floods, a lot of times insurance carriers will have the location of the property as the centroid of the parcel rather than where the structures are. And so when you're thinking about what was the damage to the structures, if you're like, yes, we're looking at this flood model and it says the centroid of the, you know, property, the middle of it is flooded, that may not be where the buildings are. And so it becomes this like really inaccurate measure if you don't have like good data on where your policies are and good data on where the flooding is. Because a lot of people are getting, I mean, we love ISI. They're a partner of ours and they provide really awesome flood data, but you can have like down to the centimeter scale flood data, but if you don't know where the building is, it's not very helpful.
You would think that if I'm insuring a building, I know exactly where it is. The reality is, in a good case scenario, in the majority of the time, I have an address, and that's about it. Now, I was a farm underwriter for a while. In farm, even an address is right, like not in any way, shape, or form an exact science. If for a large farm, it really like
it can have multiple addresses, right? Like I grew up on a farm. We had everything sent to a PO box because like nobody could find the farm. Like it's like stuff would get lost.
So yeah, it is incredible as an industry how often we insure things without exactly being 100% sure of like to the inch where this thing is. And really the reality is, because we're playing with the law of large numbers, as long as we have data on on the construction, as long as we have data on how this thing is built, it's not a huge deal until a loss happens. And when a loss happens, then we make sure that right, to dig deeper into it, and make sure that
Yeah.
that it is the correct property that we have been collecting premium on. But
Right.
95% of properties don't have a loss in any given year. It would be expensive, especially with old technology, to spend
Yeah.
a lot of time and effort to
Right.
really make sure that we have like down to an inch which
Yeah, if
property
you were
we're insuring.
manually doing it, it would make absolutely no sense, right? Like, okay, underwriter, sit there and like draw the building footprint on a map, like make sure we know exactly where it is. It just wouldn't make sense. But now with, new, AI models and daily imagery of the globe, like in a snap, basically it's like, okay, we have building footprints for all of our policies. Great. Now that we have building footprints for our policies, we can take this other data and we can triage things like claims so much faster, for disasters where we have data about like, okay, this is where the hail actually hit. This is where the fire actually hit. This is, you can take those layers and start to stack them on top. And, you can even automate another step, which is, hey, just tell me when we have a policy that was in the natural disaster zone. And batch those. Like it's amazing how quickly these things can be automated now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the listeners, right? They're listening, they're interested, whether it's the head of underwriting or the head of claims or head of IT or
Yeah.
more than likely the VP of innovation. So I see that you have a requested demo on the website, but we do the demo. It looks good. I'm interested. What kind of commitment is it? Is it and what is what does the integration look like? Like does this only make sense if I'm Nationwide, State Farm, and Allstate, or like does it make sense kind of with the regionals and the somewhat smaller carriers?
Yeah. It definitely matters to both, where we've seen the like regionals and the smaller carriers, and then also the specialized insurance companies, is with the specialized ones, they can use data more flexibly in underwriting. And so for them, it's interesting because they have, more information on like, how, yes, this is close to the beach, maybe, but what is the elevation change, right? And they can look at that sort of information at scale really easily. And then for the regional ones, it means they can look at like, okay, we haven't gone into this part of the market. We've been pushing it off to these folks or not covering these things because we don't have the staff. Now, if you're able to automate certain parts of the process and look at other layers of data, you can start to expand markets on top of, obviously the claims type workflows. The process. So because, my PhD is actually, it's in mechanical engineering, but my dissertation work was actually innovation in necessarily bureaucratic and hierarchical organizations. So, which is like a whole adventure. And I studied the world's largest organizations when I did that. And so we have an understanding of, when you're dealing with insurance, obviously there's so much policy involved. And there are so many constraints on how you can handle data, how you can use data. Changing process can be a very tough thing for insurance companies. So usually what we do is the first step is a smaller, really quick kind of assessment period for us both. So for us as a company, we want to make sure that we're working with somebody long-term who like, okay, these are the ways that they're doing things. This is the change that they're actually trying to enact. It's not just like on the defense side, we call it innovation theater. Because for us, even as a company, if we're working with someone and they're just signing contracts to look like they're doing innovation, but they're not actually doing anything, that's a bridge to nowhere for us also. And if we're going to put, work into that relationship and making sure that they have what they need, we want it to be a true effort towards, digital innovation of some sort. or process innovation, right? Usually those have to go hand in hand. And so typically we do like 3-month just kind of assessment period on both sides. Like we'll talk through what are the actual process problems and data problems that you're trying to solve and make sure we have a good understanding of those and do all of that. And then once that has matured, then we scale from there. So one example is MS and AD. We started out in that same way. It was a 3-month, let's explore what are the problems you want to solve. Here are the things that we can do. Our software is very modular, so we can tailor it very easily. And then now, starting this summer, we'll be rolling out all claims in Japan related to flooding for MS and AD will be handled on our platform, right? And for that, that's really exciting. And that's a huge, huge piece of infrastructure and tons of people's lives it's going to touch because they're the largest insurer in Japan. And so that's a really big deal for us and very exciting. But it started with, let's take a small bite. Let's look at what are the biggest problems that you guys want to solve. And let's see if we're actually a good fit for it first. So that's how we generally get started.
I very often ask for the or do you have a client story or two that of success, and you just shared that, so that was great.
Yeah.
Here in the US, which is 80% of the listenership according to the data, here in the US, any success stories yet in the insurance space?
In the US, we have some balls that are rolling that we can't talk about yet, but we're really excited about.
That's fantastic. And
yeah.
So yeah, no, that's fantastic. So how did you figure out that insurance was the next step after defense and the other couple of industries that so it looks like yeah, no, like it looks like based on the website, based on the solutions page, so it was basically defense, incident response, and the only two things that are like outside of that completely is insurance and logistics. And logistics, yeah, that makes. So how did you realize that insurance was a great match for
us? Yeah, I mean, I am not from the world of insurance. I made my first joke about actuarial judgment the other day, and like a room full of insurance people laughed, and I was like, yes, I know enough about the industry to like make jokes about the jargon.
That's
and
big.
I was like, yes, I've like sufficiently become embedded in insurance. It only took 10 months of trying to get up the super steep learning curve of like, okay, what is this? What is that? Just basic things. But so, we always knew defense would be a big market for us. And then incident response, a lot of what we do is methane emissions for the energy industry. So again, it's a similar workflow, right? You have spatial data that can tell you where problems are, and then you can respond to those problems. And so actually AWS Energy, we are the platform that they put people on for methane response, which is really exciting and an amazing partnership for us. And so we had started in defense. We had rolled out to the energy industry, mostly because the data types were similar. And so that was a good first market. You have people in trucks in remote places, and believe it or not, you need similar data to drive to an oil well as you do to complete a mission. And so it was a nice, good first
that goes
commercial fit.
To the whole, there's no address, right?
There's no address. Like, how do you get there? How do you keep people coordinated? And so our very first application centered around, 3 major things, which was data aggregation, whether it's, the satellite imagery or the analytics, communication. So like in the platform, I can be like, hey, at Tony, can you go to hashtag place 5, right? And you'd be like, you'd see that in the map, you'd know what I'm talking about. So we can have this text to visual conversation about places in a way that you can't elsewhere. And so a lot of industries literally still rely on paper maps that they'll draw on with like dry erase markers, take a picture and send it to each other. And that's the only way they can collaborate on geospatial and mission planning. It's crazy. I remember I was talking to a VC once and they were like, so what's your biggest competitor? And I was like, paper maps. They were like, oh, I haven't heard of them. I was like, no, like you print them.
I love that the assumption is somebody named the company that, because
Which is, it's probably a great name for a company. It's like ironic. It's, yeah. And then Geosite underwent rebranding. So we started out with like, okay, so data aggregation, collaboration, and then data security. So in both, you need really airtight data security. Who can see what we're doing where, and who has access to the system, and being able to compartmentalize projects and all of that. And during our seed round, we had an investor from the insurance market who came up to us and they were like, hey, I'm seeing a lot of people pitch spatial data in insurance and nobody knows how to use it. And I want to put my money in now on Geosite and tell you insurance should be next. And I was like, okay, cool. Thank you. Super excited to have you as an investor. You're awesome as a person and a great mentor and advisor, like personally. That's awesome. We'll get to insurance when we have time. And so we spent a few years just focused in our first year. I mean, when you're, at that stage, we're 4 people. When you're a team of 4 people, you can't target, and only one of them is the salesperson. You can't target 4 different industries. And so I was like, we can't expand yet. So early last year is when we really started to look at insurance, because we had grown enough that we had capacity and we had just raised our Series A. And immediately it was like wildfire. Like there was, especially with the search and rescue stuff that we were working on, one, the credibility of like, this is major US infrastructure. Like if a hiker gets lost, it will be our system that they are found on, right? And that response is triaged. And so that level of like, okay, this company's legit and they're also not going anywhere, right? Because they have, steady long-term, revenue. A lot
defense
of,
funding.
go ahead. Yeah, defense funding, right?
Yeah.
Like it creates a nice ballast, and I think that when large insurers or large, when carriers are working with these little startups, there's always a little bit of uncertainty about like, will you exist in 3 years? Will you exist in 10 years?
It's more than a little. It's an absolute fight internally at the carriers and the large brokers that, oh, we found beautiful technology and it looks like it can integrate with ours and we like them and we trust them and blah, blah, blah. Are they going to be around, right? And it's so hard to get past that. So you've got a massive advantage there when it comes to dealing with big institutional insurance companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because, I don't want to say we lucked into it because, the team works really hard, but the fact that we were able to have defense as our first market has really helped in other places, because in energy, people really worry about data security because, it's our grid, right? Or it's access to energy, it's competitive intelligence, it's all of these things that they have to worry about. And we're like, hey, if a special operations team feels safe using our system, I think you can too. Like we know what we're doing. We, have a massive team that's like focused on security. And, our CTO is coming straight out of the Pentagon, right? Like I saw the work that he was doing there. I guarantee he like has your stuff handled. And so, we had started there, we had this investor, and then we switched over and we were like, hey, we're not going anywhere. We're a stable company. We have incident response. We're able to layer these data. We're able to work with large organizations. I think a lot of startups don't have that patience and experience to deal with huge bureaucracies. And I'm just a crazy person who actually likes bureaucracies. It's systems design of people. And, I think it's a lot of fun to work with these huge companies.
Okay, that's
I'm one
fantastic.
of like 3 people in the world that will say I don't mind bureaucracy.
Yeah.
I just like I map. I mean, it's you map it out. You have to understand like, why are these steps there? why do people care about these things? And usually once you've built that empathy, then you're like, okay, I get why there's friction around this, right? And let's see what we can do to work together to resolve that. So
Okay.
lots of diplomacy.
Given that you guys are fairly new going after insurance, I very much look forward to a year or two down the road hearing how the success has been as you actually apply your system to a broader swath of insurance. It's been awesome to have you on. When it goes live, you'll be tagged on LinkedIn, and I will include the company's website too. So it should be pretty easy to find you. It just, for insurance, it being able to digest geographic data is a huge advantage for sure. Like easy sell.
Not even just digest it, but just like make it part of the process that already exists. That way people don't even have to change a lot of it. It's nice.
Perfect. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah. Thanks, Tony.
Awesome.